My husband and I have been married for 3 years, and for most of that time, I thought I'd landed in the kind of family people write thank you notes about. His parents were warm when we were dating. His father, a retired contractor from Phoenix named Dale, would shake my hand too hard and call me kiddo and mean it as a compliment. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law because that's what she was and what she chose to stop being, would send me recipes through the mail. Actual mail, handwritten on index cards with little drawings of the ingredients in the margins. I have a son from my first marriage. His name is Owen. He was 7 when my husband and I got married, and he is 10 now, and he is the reason I am writing this. Owen's father and I split when Owen was 2. It wasn't dramatic. We were young and wrong for each other, and we both knew it. Owen has always known his dad. They have a good relationship, every other weekend, the occasional school event, but my husband is the man who makes Owen's lunch every morning and helps him with his science fair projects and taught him how to throw a spiral. My husband chose Owen. That matters. That will always matter to me. What happened at Owen's graduation ceremony is something I will never fully unhear. Owen finished 5th grade in June. His elementary school held a small ceremony in the gymnasium, construction paper banners, folding chairs, every kid's name read aloud while they walked across a little stage made of plywood and optimism. It was the sweetest thing I'd ever seen. Owen wore a button-down shirt he'd picked out himself, navy blue with tiny white dots, and he kept smoothing the front of it with both hands while he waited in line. We planned a dinner afterward. My mother-in-law suggested it. A reservation at a steakhouse my father-in-law liked, a private room, the whole family together to celebrate. My husband's sister was flying in from Tucson with her 2 kids. His brother was driving up from Scottsdale with his daughter. 6 grandchildren total, including Owen, crowded around a long table with a cake at the center that my mother-in-law had special ordered from a bakery in her neighborhood. It said, "Congratulations, graduates," in blue and gold because 3 of the 6 kids were finishing 5th or 8th grade that same week. I remember thinking, pulling into the parking lot, that Owen looked nervous in the good way. The way kids get when they know something nice is about to happen and they can't quite hold it in. We ordered. The kids ate rolls and ignored their salads. My father-in-law made a toast with sparkling cider he'd had the waiter pour into wine glasses for the children because he always did things like that. Little gestures to make them feel grown up. My husband squeezed my hand under the table. And then my mother-in-law stood up. She said she had a little something for the graduates. She reached into the large tote bag she always carries, the kind with the structured bottom that never tips over, and she began pulling out boxes. Flat white boxes, the kind electronics come in. One for my niece, one for my nephew, the younger one for my husband's brother's daughter. 3 boxes, 3 kids graduating. Owen sat up a little straighter. My mother-in-law sat back down and smoothed her napkin across her lap. I watched Owen's face go through something I can only describe as very quiet math. He looked at the 3 boxes, then at the empty space in front of him, then at me. He didn't say anything. He was 10 years old and he didn't say a single word. He just picked up his fork and moved a piece of asparagus to the edge of his plate. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. Because surely there had been a mistake. Surely she'd miscounted or left something in the car. Or there was another bag somewhere. I looked at my husband. He was already looking at her. "Mom," he said. Very quiet. "Owen's graduating too." My mother-in-law looked at Owen, then back at my husband. She smiled the way people smile when they think they're about to say something reasonable. "Of course," she said, "but these are for the grandchildren." The table went very still. My sister-in-law's hand stopped halfway to her glass. My brother-in-law looked down. The 3 cousins who'd just gotten gifts went immediately, instinctively quiet in the way children do when they sense something has gone wrong but don't yet know what shape it is. My husband said her name. Just her name. She didn't look embarrassed. That was the thing I kept coming back to, later, lying awake at 2 in the morning while the ceiling fan made its slow circles. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked like a woman who had made a reasonable decision she was prepared to explain if necessary. "It's different," she said. "You know what I mean." I knew what she meant. She meant that Owen had a father somewhere. She meant that when she looked at the family tree, she could not find a branch where he belonged. She meant that 3 years of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and a little boy calling her by the same name her other grandchildren used, none of that had added up to what she apparently needed it to add up to. Owen excused himself to use the bathroom. He stood up carefully, pushed his chair in, and walked across the restaurant with his navy blue shirt and his new dress shoes and his 10-year-old dignity. I watched him the whole way. I turned to my mother-in-law. I did not raise my voice. I want to be clear about that, because I'd spent years believing that keeping the peace was the same as being good, and I was done believing that. I said, "Owen is my son. He is the child in this family who finished 5th grade this week. If you cannot see that, I need you to tell me right now so I know exactly what we're dealing with." She started to say something about intention, about not meaning any harm, about how I was taking it the wrong way. My husband put his hand flat on the table. "Stop," he said. She stopped. Owen came back from the bathroom. His eyes were dry and his face was the careful, composed face of a child who has decided not to give anyone the satisfaction. He sat down and picked up his fork again, and I loved him so fiercely in that moment that it was almost hard to breathe. We did not stay for cake. The drive home was quiet. My husband drove and I sat in the back with Owen, which I never do, but I needed to be next to him. He leaned his head against the window and watched the streetlights go by. "Are you okay?" I asked. He thought about it. Owen is a thinker. He never answers a question he hasn't actually considered. "I don't know," he said. "I don't understand what I did." "You didn't do anything," I said. "Then why?" "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," I said. "Big ones. And it has nothing to do with you." He was quiet for another mile or so. "Dad says you always have my back," he said. "Dad is right," I said. He nodded like that settled something, and leaned his head back against the window, and I stared at the side of his face in the dark and made myself a promise. My mother-in-law called the next morning. I didn't answer. She called my husband. He answered and I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and listened to half the conversation. She was sorry if it came across the wrong way. She hadn't meant to cause a scene. She'd simply thought, well, it was a family occasion, and of course she loved Owen, she did, but surely we could understand that there was a certain, she was trying to explain something about how families work, about blood, about what gets passed down. My husband said, "Mom, stop talking." She stopped. "Owen is our son," he said. "He is not a guest in this family. He is not a conditional member. He is our son. And if you cannot treat him the same as the other grandchildren, then I need to know that now, because that changes things." She said she would try to do better. My husband said trying wasn't going to be enough this time. He said she owed Owen an apology, a direct one, not a general sentiment of goodwill filtered through my husband as intermediary. He said until that happened, she wasn't going to be spending time with Owen. She said that seemed extreme. He said, "I'm going to stop you right there. You stood up at a table of 6 children and you publicly handed gifts to every child in the room except mine. There is no version of that which is not extreme." She cried. My mother-in-law is a woman who cries when she feels cornered. And I used to find it difficult to hold a position in the face of those tears. I didn't find it difficult anymore. I sat at my kitchen table, and I listened, and I held my coffee cup with both hands, and I felt something settle in my chest, like a door clicking shut. My father-in-law called that afternoon. He didn't lead with an apology. He led with context. He explained that my mother-in-law had a traditional view of family. He explained that Owen's father was still in the picture, which complicated things for her. He explained that she hadn't meant it as a rejection, only as an acknowledgement of, he searched for the word, complexity. I let him finish. Then I said, "Dale, your wife sat at a table with a 10-year-old boy who was celebrating one of the first milestones of his life. She handed gifts to every child at the table except him. He had to excuse himself to the bathroom so he wouldn't cry in front of the family. I don't need to understand her reasoning. I need to know whether she understands what she did to him." He was quiet for a moment. "She feels terrible," he said. "That's not what I asked," I said. Another silence. "I'll talk to her," he said. "Thank you," I said. But I want to be honest with you. Until she talks to Owen directly, I'm not going to pretend everything is fine. I'm not going to bring him around and smile and let him wonder whether it's going to happen again. He's 10. He doesn't have the vocabulary to protect himself from that. I do, and I'm going to use it. He said he understood. I think he might have. 2 weeks passed. My husband's sister texted me a long message about how she was horrified by what happened, how she'd had a long talk with her own kids about it on the drive home, how her daughter had cried and said she didn't want the gift anymore, and they'd had a whole conversation about fairness and family that she was actually grateful for. I appreciated that. I told her so. She said she'd spoken to her mother too, and that her mother was complicated. That was the word she used. My husband's brother texted my husband, not me, which I noticed. My mother-in-law sent a card, a physical card, like the recipe cards she used to send, but this time it was a generic, thinking of you card from a drugstore with a watercolor flower on the front. Inside she'd written, "Owen is a wonderful boy and I hope he knows how much he is loved." She signed it with her first name. I read it twice. I set it on the counter. I waited to feel something. I didn't feel anything except tired. My husband read it over my shoulder. He didn't say anything for a moment. "That's not an apology," he said. "No," I said, "it's not even close." "No," I said. He picked up his phone and called her. I took the card off the counter and put it in the recycling bin. I didn't do it dramatically. I just didn't want it on my counter. My husband had a long phone call with his mother that evening. I gave them privacy. I took Owen to his baseball practice, sat in the bleachers in the May heat, watched him field grounders and argue cheerfully with his teammate about whose turn it was to bat next. He seemed fine. Kids are both more fragile and more resilient than we give them credit for, and Owen had days where he seemed fine and days where he went quiet in a way that made my stomach hurt. That day was a fine day, and I held on to it. When we got home, my husband was waiting in the kitchen with 2 glasses of iced tea already poured. He told me his mother had agreed to come over on Saturday. Not a family dinner, not a big gathering. Just her, our house, Owen. She understood that she needed to say something to him directly. She had not been warm about agreeing to it, my husband said. She had framed it more than once as something that was being done to her. But she had agreed. I said, "What she does on Saturday is going to tell us everything we need to know." He said, "I know." I said, "If she comes here and she's vague or she talks around it or she makes Owen feel like he's being handled, that's the answer. That's her telling us who she is." He said, "I know." We drank our iced tea. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a neighbor was mowing and the sound came through the window in slow waves. "I'm proud of you," I said. He looked at me. "For not making me choose between being your wife and being Owen's mother," I said. "I know that wasn't easy." He was quiet for a moment. "He's my kid," he said. Simply, like it was the most obvious thing. I think that was the moment I understood that we were going to be okay. Not that everything was fixed. Not that Saturday would be easy. Not that my mother-in-law would suddenly become someone different than she was. But that the foundation under us was solid. That my husband had decided, clearly and without drama, which way he was facing. Saturday came. My mother-in-law arrived at 11. She was dressed carefully, which I noticed. She had a gift bag. I let my husband answer the door. She came in and she looked at me and I looked at her and we both kept our faces neutral. She sat down at the kitchen table. My husband went to get Owen from his room. Owen came downstairs in basketball shorts and a t-shirt, hair still messy from the morning, carrying the book he'd been reading with his finger holding his place because that's the kind of kid he is. He never wants to lose where he is. He sat down across from his grandmother. He set his book on the table, face down, open. She said his name. He looked at her. She said, "I owe you an apology. What I did at dinner was wrong. I left you out on purpose and I told myself it made sense, but it didn't make sense. You were part of this family. You have always been part of this family, and I treated you like you weren't, and I am sorry." Owen looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. She slid the gift bag across the table. He opened it carefully. He's a careful opener, Owen. He doesn't tear. And inside was a small tablet. A good one. Not the most expensive thing in the world, but clearly chosen, clearly considered. Your mom mentioned you've been wanting one for school, she said. He said, yeah. Thank you. There was a pause. Then Owen said, can I ask you something? She said yes. He said, did you not know I was graduating too? Or did you know and you still didn't get me anything? The question hung in the air. My mother-in-law looked at the table. My husband looked at Owen with something I can only describe as love mixed with complete shock. She said quietly, I knew. Owen nodded slowly like he'd thought so. Okay, he said again. And he picked up his book and found his place and kept reading. I have thought about that moment more than almost anything else. The way a 10-year-old boy sat across from a woman who had publicly dismissed him and asked her, clearly and without cruelty, the exact question that needed to be asked, and then accepted the answer and kept reading his book. That kind of grace is not learned. It is just who some people are. My mother-in-law and I don't have the relationship we had before. I don't think we will again. There's a version of that which makes me sad, and I've spent time sitting with that sadness because I think it deserves to be acknowledged. She was kind to me for a long time. The recipe cards were real. The warmth was real, in whatever capacity she had for it. But there is also a version of it that I simply accept. She showed me something true about herself, and I adjusted accordingly. She will not be alone with Owen. She will not be the grandmother I once imagined for him. And if she makes another choice that signals to my son that he is less than, she will lose access to him entirely, and I will not hesitate and I will not feel guilty. That is not cruelty. That is a mother doing her job. Owen, for his part, uses the tablet constantly. He's currently working his way through a series of books about medieval siege warfare, which is extremely him, and he reads on the tablet at night before bed. Last week he looked up from it and told me, completely unprompted, that he thought his grandmother was trying. I said, yeah, I think she is. He said, that's something, I guess. It is something. I'm choosing to hold it as exactly that. Not more, not less. Something. A place to stand while we figure out what comes next. What I know is this. My husband and I walked out of that steakhouse 3 weeks ago, and we did not compromise. We did not tell Owen it was a misunderstanding because it wasn't. We did not smooth it over for the sake of a comfortable Sunday dinner. We stood in front of our kid and we told him the truth, which was that what happened was wrong and that we were going to do something about it and that he was loved completely and without conditions. I think about the parents in the stories I've read online, the ones who let things go for years, who rationalized and minimized and made their children absorb the cost of keeping the peace. I understand it. Peace is seductive. Conflict is exhausting. And when the person causing harm is someone you love or used to love, it is genuinely hard to hold the line. But Owen asked that woman if she had known he was graduating. She said yes, and he nodded and kept reading. He already knows who he is. The question was never really about him. The question was whether the adults in his life were going to know who they were too. I think we do now. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to keep the peace. Not in some abstract way, I mean the real, daily cost. The way you learn to read a room and adjust your volume. The way you laugh off something that hurt because the alternative is a dinner that ends badly. The way you tell yourself it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Until one day your 10-year-old son excuses himself from a table so he can cry alone in a restaurant bathroom, and you realize that every time you said fine, he was the one paying for it. That's the thing about looking the other way. It feels like neutrality. It feels like grace, but it isn't. It's just a slow transfer of cost from you to someone smaller. Owen didn't do anything to deserve what happened at that table. He showed up in his good shirt with his hair combed and his heart open, the way kids do when they trust that the people around them are safe. And someone who had known him for 3 years, who had eaten Sunday dinners with him and accepted his handmade birthday cards, decided in that moment that he didn't count. Not because of anything he'd done. Because of the circumstances of how he came into our family. What Dale didn't understand What I think he still only partially understands is that family isn't something you inherit like a piece of furniture. It's something you choose over and over in small moments and large ones. My husband chose Owen the day he married me. He chose him again in that restaurant. He chose him again on the phone the next morning and the morning after that. That kind of choosing doesn't have a finish line, it's just who you decide to be. Owen asking his grandmother directly, "Did you know I was graduating, or did you just forget?" And then sitting with her answer and going back to his book. That image will stay with me for the rest of my life. Because what he demonstrated in that moment wasn't innocence. It was something rarer and harder. It was someone who already knew his own worth and wasn't going to bargain it away to make an adult feel comfortable. At 10 years old, with a book in his hand. I don't know exactly when I stopped being afraid of conflict. I think it happened slowly, over the course of watching my son absorb things he should never have had to absorb. Somewhere in there, I made the calculation that his dignity was worth more than a comfortable holiday. That clarity didn't make me angry, it made me steady. And steady, I've learned, is more powerful than loud. What I know now is that you cannot protect the people you love from the outside while you're still negotiating with the inside. At some point, you have to decide what you won't tolerate. Not because you're cruel, not because you want to fight, but because the child across from you is watching how you move through the world and learning from it. Owen is learning what it looks like when someone stands up for him. I want him to carry that. I want him to know, in the part of himself that never forgets, that he has always been worth standing up for. That's not a lesson I could have taught him with words. It had to be lived.